Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. This time, several big topics again today, and this time again, let's lead from with the US Iran update. So, how should we understand? Is it a state of peace? Is it a state of war? Because a lot of firing happens, talks happen, good voice comes out, and all the world again gets confused. Sometimes you just leave it, let's only wait for the final outcome.
The Trump administration has chosen the worst of two worlds, which is to fight and to talk instead of either fighting or talking. That generally and historically has not worked out well. Just see what happened with Afghanistan. There was the same strategy. It backfired tremendously. There are some speculations that all of this is just theater and that it may go so far as each side notifying each other about its next moves just to show their strength to their own supporters. Both Iran and Trump are infamous for brinksmanship, and this could be a good way to show that they're coming in from a position of strength and not really compromising on their demands. But if that is the case, this is a strategy that certainly raises a lot more questions than answers in the United States. At least in Iran, it's not like there's a huge number of people who can freely ask any questions. But what is apparent from what we have seen is that the 2-month framework that was established at the beginning of this process is unlikely to survive as a real ceasefire in the sense that it's customarily understood. It may remain alive diplomatically as a shell for negotiations, for enforcement claims, and for Gulf mediation, but it's certainly nothing like what a traditional ceasefire looks like. Iran, for one thing, has strong incentives to test the boundaries through continuing maritime attacks, through proxy pressure, through drone activity and attacks on Gulf shipping or on nearby countries. Bahrain and other smaller Gulf states are likely to continue to remain pressure points because of US bases in the area and the political symbolism of threatening Gulf allies that are supposed to be under the American protection. The Trump administration will likely continue to respond to any visible Iranian violations with limited airstrikes on RGC, missile, drone, or naval infrastructure, and then return quickly to negotiation channels. And the practical result of all of this is going to be another managed escalation cycle. Iran violates, Washington punishes, Gulf states mediate, and all parties avoid admitting that the framework has largely collapsed. So far, we're seeing that J.D. Vance claims that the talks in Qatar are going well, but this is a very relative question because the talks we're seeing now are indirect. Kushner and Bitkov are there, but they're talking to the Qatari leadership, not to Iranians directly. High-level personalities are not engaging with each other, and it's unclear what is actually being discussed, given that the talks are being mediated by Qatar and Pakistan, and it's unclear whether everything is whether nothing is getting lost in translation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, when is the breakthrough likely to happen? All those 14 points and so many points and so many, Switzerland, all these places. Where are we at this stage?
There is no transparency about this process at all. At various points in time, Trump claimed that it's only a matter of technical agreements and technical processes to remove nuclear material from Iran. But now it looks like the only pressing issue is the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The ballistic missile program is not in the MOU at all, from what the Pakistani Prime Minister pointed out, and the nuclear issue has faded into the background as Strait of Hormuz and the release of oil has taken um, a priority. And Iran is actually one of the top beneficiaries of this process because they are now freely selling oil, including to American buyers. Uh, the prices have indeed collapsed. In some cases, they even collapsed below the threshold of what they were right before the Operation Epic Fury began. But it's not an even process. Any major escalation will set them right back up. And Iran is insisting on controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is insisting on a toll being paid in some form, and different countries have suggested different plans for that. But so far, Iran is not budging from the general premise, and ships have been turned away and or attacked. In fact, one South Korean ship is leaving the area altogether after being attacked. So. Um, we're not seeing much serious progress in terms of action. What is happening in Bakrupsi is anyone's guess because there has been no serious reporting on the details of the talks.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's the state of the Strait of Hormuz? It's open, partially open, fully closed. Who is controlling it? What's happening?
I'd say it's partially open in the sense that US has stopped blockading it and is no longer enforcing the blockade. But it's closed in the sense that the area is still heavily mined and it will require a serious cooperative force to demine it once that becomes physically feasible. For now, that remains out of reach because Iran assets are still very much in the area. They're still very much threatening tankers, ships. They're firing on ships with drones and missiles, and essentially continuing the bilateral deals they struck with various countries, which require financial sums being paid to Iran in exchange for a harassment-free passage to wherever they are going. Oman, at various points, has agreed with Iran on co-managing this situation, disagreed on whether to pay the tolls or not, has changed its position or said different things to different audiences. It's unclear what Oman's actual position is, but it is the closest to Iran in terms of geography of managing this particular body of water, and it also would benefit from any tolls collected. So it's not really should not be trusted as an honest broker in implementation or even negotiation of these arrangements. I would certainly consider the risk of going through the Strait of Hormuz as high now as at any point during the last few months. And it's very obvious that for Iran, it's a very serious leverage it does not wish to give up, precisely because it understands that that enforcing the freedom of navigation is going to be more difficult than ever before for the US or for anyone else at this point.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, doesn't it look like, Irina, that with every passing day, the impression goes that, see, Iran is so powerful, it can talk to the US eye to eye and in the same way that they want to be talked to. And this gives a bit of, strength to them in another way, perceptionally, and also damages US reputation as the world's power in that sense, because it is difficult to understand that US would ever come to this position. Secondly, does it look like that President Trump is delaying it and will announce a breakthrough only perhaps near the midterms so that it benefits him then the maximum?
Well, here's the thing. I do agree that Trump is looking towards the midterms and is trying to link these talks to the midterms in some way. But I don't think there is a genuine breakthrough simply because the Iranians would benefit from announcing some sort of a diplomatic victory, and they haven't done that yet. So I think those talks really are at an impasse over any larger issues, and whatever agreements they have, they're purely technical and very limited in nature. Regarding the optics, the problem is not only has Trump made contradictory campaign promises and post-election promises to various audiences that are simply not compatible, they're mutually exclusive, but he's also made his entire presidency about saving money and costs. And the problem is he thought that he would save costs by withdrawing from the war early, but in reality, he was forced to expend even more munitions as a result of an uneven process and as a result of failing to collapse the will of the regime. And now, what he thought would be a cost-saving operation has turned into a fiscal nightmare. He's demanding more money from Congress, but Congress has now passed two resolutions, bicameral, bipartisan resolutions, limiting the executive branch's war powers, and also at least some members of Congress are blocking the flow of funding for these operations for what they're worth, pending Trump's agreement to provide security to Europe on other fronts, which Trump has promised, but which has not happened as of yet. So we are seeing a domestic political problem. We're seeing a funding problem. We're seeing that U.S. has expended approximately 80% of its THAAD missiles on the operations, and it would take time to replace them, and it would take money to replace them. And we are no closer to resolving this than a few months ago, really. I don't see any radical changes from the discussions we've had a month or two ago about the very same issues. There hasn't been a strategic shift in anyone's position.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Let's move on from this topic to the other one, that is the US Lebanon Israel trilateral partial withdrawal agreement. How should we understand? Where is it now? Because earlier in the Iran US deal, Israel was not figuring. In this deal, Iran is not figuring. But in terms of Lebanon, it is still there. How should we understand? Does it make any sense, or will it make sense in the coming days or months?
So the deal was finally signed after many delays, but it is not what people think it is. Now, symbolically, Lebanon did recognize Israel as an existing entity, which I suppose is progress after over 75 years, but in practice, it doesn't mean much. And in terms of pragmatic implementation, it is a loss, not a victory for Israel, because it is being pressured by the US to give up its current military positions in favor of very flimsy security guarantees. The problem is Iran has managed to link the Lebanon situation to the MOU between the bilateral MOU with the US. So essentially, it's putting the burden on US, and today the announcement was made in very, very plain language, to keep Israel in line and out of Lebanon in order for these peace talks to proceed and to have any chance of essentially agreeing to anything such as reopening the Strait of Hormuz, by the way, which can be closed off at any point. That's quite obvious to anyone who's watching what's been happening. Essentially, the main point of the agreement, once you get through the symbolism of Lebanon's recognition of Israel's existence, is that Israel agrees to a partial withdrawal from Lebanon in exchange for the Lebanese government committing to the enforcement of Hezbollah disarmament. Now, Hezbollah, of course, did not agree to any part of this process, and yet Israel is being forced out. Not completely, not immediately, but this is an ongoing process, and essentially that that leaves the Lebanese government on its own in disarming an entity it has not been able to disarm prior to Israel's involvement. Now, some would argue that Israel's offensive has weakened Hezbollah, which may help Lebanon achieve its goals, but in reality, that is an arguably false because Hezbollah started using the same FPV drones that are now being used in the Russia-Ukraine war with success, forcing Israel out of some positions through military means. That's leaving aside the U.S. pressure and so forth, and also for essentially being able to continuing to penetrate the north. Israel has enacted some defenses that have been partially successful, but nevertheless, the death toll in Lebanon continues to rise, and there is no strategy against the FPV drones that has been 100% successful. So we are seeing a combination of factors that do not look particularly favorable to the future. Those who are celebrating this as a road to peace with Lebanon are the same people who are ignoring that in Gaza the same strategy has backfired, that Hamas has consolidated its positions, that it has shut down local protests, and essentially is looking to return to the battlefield as soon as it recoups its losses in a few months from now, perhaps. So the same strategy that has failed in Gaza is not likely to succeed in Lebanon either. And here, Iran is much more directly involved than it is in Gaza. So this is not looking promising at all. I think this is very premature celebration, and I think this agreement that was signed is a very far cry from Lebanon joining Abraham Accords or engaging in any sort of security coordination with Israel.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. From there, this let's move on to Ukraine and Poland. They have had a very good relationship. Suddenly, you find that they are talking about something which was related to World War II. What's happening? How should a person anywhere else out of Europe or anywhere else understand what's happening between Poland and Ukraine, who have such a good relationship?
Now, I'm just going to summarize the situation briefly before explaining the current developments, just for the sake of the audience who may not be aware of what's going on. The Ukrainian armed forces decided to honor and to relocate the remains of a famous nationalist brigade that was well known for fighting for Ukrainian independence. But the problem, of course, with that brigade is that a significant portion of it was also involved in anti-Polish atrocities during World War II. Something that Poland has not forgotten, and that has been a point of historical contention between the two countries over the years. President Zelensky signed this decision to honor that brigade into law. He was not the initiator of it, just to be clear. He just went along with something that the backers and supporters of those groups really wanted to do. A large part of them is of the supporters of this decision comprise frontline units in the Ukrainian military. Many of them are from Western Ukraine. Zelensky needs their political and military support. That's the story on the Ukrainian side. On the Polish side, there is a domestic fight between the Prime Minister Tusk, who is pro-European Union, and President Nawrocki, who is from the who is much closer to the opposition Law and Justice Party that is seeking a comeback to power in the upcoming elections. And he has been blocking Tusk's initiatives at every level, which is one of the few things that the president in Poland can do. He has also aligned himself very openly with President Trump and has claimed that Poland is benefiting from Nawrocki's close relationship with Trump. In this particular instance, he is seeking to play on the populist nationalist fervor in Poland over the World War II grievances in order to benefit the opposition groups aligning against Tusk in the upcoming elections. It's basically a domestic political play. It's not really about Ukraine at all. And it's really just about capitalizing on these sentiments and galvanizing particular specific portions of the Polish base. The result of his comments was a spat between the two leaders. He also revoked an award that Poland had awarded to Zelensky. As a result of that, various other Ukrainian members of the Ukrainian government gave up voluntarily their own rewards, including different ones that they had received from Poland at various points in time. Polish officials started returning the awards they had gotten from Ukraine at various points in time. Zelensky stopped using a Polish airport and started using one in Moldova instead. He decided not to attend a major Gdansk-based Ukraine recovery conference that brought together thousands of business leaders, officials, thought leaders, and others to basically aid Ukrainian economic positions. So it was a lower-ranking officials who had attended. Even though their presence was quite significant, it was still a political signal. In return, Poland retaliated by canceling the agreement to send MiGs to Ukraine, while one of the Polish ministers claimed that Ukraine actually decided not to take those from Poland. It's unclear which story is correct. The bottom line is this defense agreement is not moving forward. Zelensky's absence weakened the symbolism of the event and fed the impression of a widening political feud with Nawrocki. The historical dispute over the UPA, the Polish memory politics, Ukrainian nationalism, and wartime trauma has returned as a serious irritant, becoming increasingly a broader political talking point in Polish and Ukrainian media alike. The conference itself went well because reconstruction, defense industrial cooperation, energy resilience, transport corridors, and private investment remained urgent, and they were addressed quite thoroughly. Poland used the conference to tie Ukrainian recovery to European security, border infrastructure, logistics, air defense, and long-term defense production, which was also benefiting Polish positions. But as a result of this growing dysfunction, news paths materialized, including a new disagreement between the Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski and the Lviv mayor, mayor of a major Western Ukrainian city, which added another layer because reconstruction, local influence, and Polish commercial access are now part of the dispute. This will not signal a complete diplomatic breakdown, but a colder, more transactional partnership shaped by security necessity, refugee politics, agriculture, historical memory, and reconstruction competition is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. And moreover, for 3 years now, Poland has not been really one of the leading deliverers of security assistance to Ukraine, despite its public statements, even before Nawrocki took office. So all of these things, Poland has largely taken itself out as a major out of having major leverage on Ukraine in terms of defense assistance. So that also weakens its position in terms of bilateral relations from that perspective. And
Absolutely.
all of
Yeah,
that
carry on.
is
Carry on.
all of,
Carry on.
all of that is seen by experts outside the country as benefiting Russia most of all, and that Russia is playing up these disputes, and this sort of populism is an unhealthy sort that is only helping with helping enhance security vulnerabilities in Europe overall.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. One question that comes to my mind is that in today's time, can another country tell another country what heroes or war heroes or heroes of the past they should uh, idolize, remember, or put them into recognition? How does that sound from that perspective, Irina?
I think it's an exercise in futility, and we have seen how that backfired with Russia, which had insisted on putting up, ex-Soviet monuments everywhere and cultural monuments, and as a result of its aggressive posture, not only former communist statues have been removed, but even Russian language and Russian cultural heritage is being seen as imperialist, not only in Ukraine but in the Baltics and some other countries. So this sort of heritage dispute is a direct result of physical aggression and of political insistence on veneration of these types of figures when at odds with the ongoing cultural trends in other countries. So the Polish-Ukrainian dispute is not likely to end in any different way. I don't think Poland should be focusing on that. And whatever, to the extent there is concern that these past, the veneration of past heroes could lead to a resurgence of extreme nationalism or bigotry in Ukraine, that should be a topic for very serious private discussions on a diplomatic level, not social media spats and not media posturing and grandstanding over award ceremonies and the like. I don't think that sends the right message, even if there are legitimate concerns.
Absolutely, absolutely. From this part of the world, I hope that this is just political and that, relations are back to normal. Does it look like that it will be back to normal even better after understanding things much more pragmatically?
Much depends on the outcome of elections in Poland. I don't think that there is any serious reason for uh, Polish politicians to continue with this after they accomplish what they set out to accomplish. It's likely that at least some of the heat will go down. However, there is a third party concern that extremists in Poland and in Ukraine will pick up the mantle long after the signature events are settled, and they will try to play on these uh, grievances to advance their own agenda long past their due date, so to speak. So there is a concern that while officially these issues may settle in a few months from now, unofficially there will be interested parties who will look to capitalize on these sort of differences and to prolong them long after even the initiators have made their peace.
Absolutely. And staying on with Ukraine, Irina, let's touch on this Ukraine Russia war. Looks like, the whole impression is going that Ukraine technology, drones, missiles, they are having an upper hand. And the way it has conducted, put pressure on Russia with regards to energy and oil, rationing of gasoline in Russia, big lines and lots of talk about that. How should one understand? Is it a lot of pressure for Putin, and there should be an end in sight of this war soon?
I think Putin may push for a ceasefire soon. I don't think he's ready to end the war, and we're not seeing any sign of it. We're seeing he's actually training younger and younger generations of Russians at an early age to prepare them for wartime activity. He may need a break simply because the country is literally running out of gas. And here's a huge irony: Russia has now been forced to not only seize the exports of diesel abroad, but they have actually started purchasing some gas from India, and likely it's the very same gas that India had earlier bought at a discount, being which is now being resold to them at a profit for India. I would not be surprised at that turn of events at all. So that's, there is a serious situation. There are long lines for gas in Moscow, and there's fights starting, about energy, and there's popular dissatisfaction, and there's a 20-year low economic pessimism across the country. The statements from Russian officials have not at all been reassuring. They basically try to dismiss public concerns without adequately addressing them. And Putin has been forced to acknowledge that it is an actual issue and a problem. Moreover, this energy shortage is not only impacting the daily quality of life in Russia, it's impacting the course of the war, the access to the types of weapons that Russia can use or continue building, and supply chains, including dual-use technologies that Russia needs to continue fighting. So there's been a very wide effect for these energy disruptions, and it's also putting pressure on Russia's ability to benefit OPEC, um, and recalibrating dynamics within OPEC. So the effects are quite wide ranging, actually, even beyond the, the intended effect by Ukraine itself.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So let's keep on watching and hope that either in the form of ceasefire or a complete you know uh, stoppage to war, that would be welcome. But it's just the world is getting an impression that Putin is not the same Putin anymore. And maybe, do you think there will be a lot of internal pressure now from the economic front, on the military front, that that there would be some sort of a you know uh, protest inside that would lead to change in positions there in Russia? How does that look like? Or it's unlikely like that? Many people hope that it might happen.
Look, I think we're seeing incidents of some Russian pro-Putin commentators already showing dissatisfaction with the way this war is being handled, not with the political causes behind it, but with its management. But so far, the security services have held a tight grip on the population, and it will take a lot more than a few days of economic hardship for really serious turmoil and violent protests to start taking hold that could divert resources from the security services into various areas of the country. That would take time. That would take probably months of consistent pressure. This is why Ukraine has been talking about a 40-day offensive aiming at destabilizing Russia by basically dismantling its energy infrastructure in a very systematic way. That's what it's going to take to have the sort of economic impact that cannot be resolved by restoring the current facilities. The pressure needs to be far wider, far stronger. So far, it has been putting some pressure, but it has not been a game changer yet. However, I think there is a good chance that if things keep going the way they are, it will become a serious game changer, especially if Ukraine gets the financial and other and military assistance that it badly needs. It has done miracles on its own and with very limited backing, but right now there is this very serious opportunity to force Russia to retreat, and it should not be missed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of Russia, uh, Latvian intelligence it warns of possible destabilization and provocation from Russia, either in the Baltics or Poland. How should one understand what's happening there? Why would Russia do that when it's already its hands are full?
Well, actually, the reason for opening another front is to divert resources and attention. And the Baltics are a particularly fraught and vulnerable area. They have small populations. The populations are well trained, but they're susceptible to the very same things that Ukraine has been. And moving NATO resources during a major attack would be quite difficult. Um, there are some NATO bases. There are talks about expanding the local brigades, but all of that takes time. Latvian warning is only the latest in a series of intelligence warning, including from Ukraine, but also from Western services that have warned about the plans for a hybrid warfare episode. It's less likely to be a conventional attack, such as the invasion of Ukraine, and more likely to be some sort of a hybrid provocation that could be testing NATO cohesion, it could be testing local resources, could be simply a diversion. But it's more likely to happen than not because Russia has recently changed its laws in a way that is consistent with a message towards expanding operations in that part of the world. It has issued direct threats to some of the countries, including all three Baltic states, Finland and Poland, among others. There's also been concern about U.S. not delivering weapons due to the war of Iran that it has promised to the same countries. And Latvia's intelligence came out after a series of warnings have been delivered to NATO leadership and after an incident involving a Russian drone penetrating Latvian airspace, which was thankfully taken down by a French jet, but which has raised a lot of questions about how far such incidents can go. And the warning fits Russia's current pattern: sabotage, cyber attacks, drone incursions, arson, border pressure, migrant weaponization, and influence operations aimed at NATO cohesion. It could include also starting some sort of civil unrest in the Russian speaking or peripheral areas of some of those countries. It could look like anything. Poland and the Baltic states are better prepared than they were before 2022, with higher defense spending, more NATO presence, stronger border controls, and accelerated civil defense planning. But the main vulnerability remains the gray zone. Russia is more likely to create ambiguous incidents than launch an open conventional attack, which would be costly, ill suited, and it would actually split its own forces. Moscow's goal would be hesitation, political panic, attribution disputes, and divisions of a proportional response. The region can manage isolated provocations. The larger risk is a cluster of simultaneous incidents designed to overwhelm political coordination across the capitals of those countries, Brussels and Washington. The next few months are particularly dangerous because defensive infrastructure, drone walls, air defense coverage, and civil resilience systems remain incomplete, and there has been relatively limited movement in advancing them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on from that part of the world to this part of the world. And apparently, President Trump he's planned a visit in early 2027 to to India. So why is this being so much in advance? Especially midterms are there, so many other things can happen. So much in advance. What does it say? Suddenly, India has become very close to the U.S. administration. How does this look like? This whole announcement and upcoming visit.
So the early announcement is seen as part of a series of reassurance gestures aimed at India after a difficult period in relations. due to tariff pressure, Russian oil disputes, visa concerns, and uncertainty over Washington's China policy, among other things. And it also creates a political deadline for trade negotiations, for defense cooperation talks, um, for any energy deals, technology agreements, and a possible Quad centered regional message. But there is also another signal that Trump wants to repair the optics of the relationship before tensions become structural and embedded. He understands that Prime Minister Modi values high level symbolism, ceremony, and personal diplomacy, just like Trump himself in some ways. So a presidential visit would go a long way, giving both sides time to construct a summit around restored trust. The relationship, of course, remains strategically important but politically strained. India still wants US technology, markets, and defense ties, and still wants to be part of this China balancing power mechanism, but it will continue to resist pressure that threatens its strategic autonomy. So we have not seen any actual breakthroughs, despite talks about a concluded or nearly concluded trade deal. Nothing, nothing material has yet emerged. So this announcement could be a way, an incentive to move things along on a practical level and to deliver Trump some diplomatic and economic victories before the midterms.
Absolutely, absolutely. That we'll watch out for, and hopefully the visit will happen. Whatever the results of so many things that is happening in the world, and also the midterms. But let's also talk. Keeping with it, India Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Seychelles. Why people generally hear about Seychelles as a nice place to visit, diplomatically, strategically? How do you see this importance here? Help us understand. How do you see from that part of the world?
Well, in addition to being a tourist attraction, Seychelles is actually central to India's West Indian Ocean strategy because it's located near critical sea lanes which link the Gulf, East Africa, the Mozambique Channel, and the wider Indo-Pacific. And the signal here is meant to address the fact that India intends to compete seriously with China in island states through development finance, through maritime security, digital infrastructure, legal cooperation, and of course, elite diplomacy such as his personal visit. There are substantial talks and not just optics to this visit, including agreements on credit, extradition, payment systems, and cooperation to expand India's influence beyond naval affairs into governance, finance, and internal security. The visit also strengthens India's image as a preferred security partner for smaller island states facing debt, climate pressure, illegal fishing, maritime crime, and great power competition. Of course, the main message here is to Beijing, which is that India will contest Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean through political presence, infrastructure, security partnerships, and development tools. And it's actually part of a continuous series of actions to strengthen India's maritime presence, which includes constructing basically militarized zones not far from the Strait of Malacca, which has been in the news, particularly in Asia lately, but even the US is starting to pay attention to that because the Strait of Malacca is China's vulnerability. It's China's Strait of Hormuz, and any close up to that area leaves China very vulnerable and dependent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of China, let's talk of China a bit more. Suddenly, it has continued more patrols around Taiwan. It has imposed export-import control on key American companies. Also, has become much more active. Has got a port in Bangladesh, which earlier was with India. How should we understand this China's latest moves? Is it, especially with so much of financial pressure at home, and especially the recent crash of a small aircraft into one of its tallest buildings? help us understand, is China, what is China doing? What does it want from here on?
So China is, as always, applying pressure across several theaters at once. There's the military signal, there's the economic restriction on US companies, there's infrastructure gains in South Asia. So the patrols are meant to normalize Chinese military presence, to exhaust Taiwanese readiness, to test allied responses, and to create a new baseline of coercion. And to some extent, it's already working, because we are seeing the trend for Taiwanese economic elites to relocate to Singapore to protect their assets and to protect themselves against any possible military incursion. At the same time, the export-import controls on American companies show Beijing's willingness to weaponize supply chains, dual-use goods, rare earths, procurement access, and regulatory pressure, and to go scorched earth in its competition with the US. Part of it is tit for tat response to some of the US tactics, but part of it is escalation, and it's managed escalation to weaken US, to put US in a disfavorable position, to take advantage of US vulnerabilities at a critical time, and to also create a political backlash in the US domestically. At the same time, we have heard India's loss of a Bangladesh port created an opportunity for China to show that it's gaining ground in India's neighborhood. Bangladesh is signaling a greater willingness to hedge between India and China, especially after recent political changes and the growing sensitivity to Indian influence. For India, the lesson is clear. Simply depending on the benefits of geography is no longer enough. Speed, financing, political tact, local relationships, and implementation will now determine influence, and certainly depending on the US is futile, because US itself is coming under significant pressure. And so far, there has not been a clear strategy, not even after Trump's visit to China, to handle these pressure points. We have seen relative muteness from Washington, although it has been escalating on some economic fronts and confronting some of the Chinese-made cars and technologies and designating them as bad for business and so forth. In terms of very serious pushback, it has so far been relatively minimal.
Yes, yes, Irina. Uh,
I would add, of course, that Trump's preoccupation with Iran is giving China space to experiment with all of these things, because it is seen that Washington cannot multitask effectively. It's entirely focused on domestic concerns and on the Iran situation, and is unable to really focus on the Indo-Pacific as much as it was supposed to, according to Trump's own rhetoric earlier in his term.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots happening in the world, and that's why we come to you every 2 weeks to understand the world better. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. This was great as always.